Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. We are from theniche-case.com. Big up Aotearoa, big up Aotearoa Sport Wildcard. We are rocking and rolling through the T20 World Cup, and we will touch on the Blackcaps in a second, but I'm curious, just as a warm-up, swing the leg, roll the arm over, throwdowns. Couple of throwdowns here, just get the middle of the bat working. How are you thinking about the T20 World Cup? Any lasting thoughts from the first couple of days play? Almost a week now, actually.
Well, I mean, the two games I've watched, I didn't watch all of the India-Pakistan game, but watched the majority of it, and then caught all the highlights of the dramatic ending as well, which was even better than what I'd already seen. The two games I've watched, the New Zealand-Australia game and the India-Pakistan game, have legit been two of the best 2020 internationals I've ever seen. Like, they're just unreal contests. Didn't watch much of England-Ireland, but saw bits and pieces of it, and Ireland got a big upset there, thanks to old mates Duckworth, Lewis, and also Stern. Now there's a third fella seems to have adjusted it for modern times or whatever.
Is that why it's DLS?
I think so. The Duckworth Lewis Stern method is what they now seem to be calling it. I don't know. Simon Dawes seemed to emphatically say that yesterday. So he tends to like people to know when he's right. So that's probably true. A shame that the Blackcaps Afghanistan game got rained off, because that also actually could have been quite an enticing game. But I mean, even before that, like Ireland beating West Indies, I keep forgetting that the tournament was on for like a week before the top teams came into it. But like, there's not much more you can say than that. Like it's still getting started because of some of the weather hiccups and stuff. But like, you've had a couple upsets, you've had some just great high quality cricket. It's been a fantastic tournament so far.
Has indeed. We recap the first Blackcaps win in the Patreon podcast for the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/EL Niche L Niche, as well as a little New Zealand Breakers kōrero. And we will be back with another Patreon podcast next week on next Tuesday. Patreon is the best way to support the Niche Case straight up the guts directly. Patreon.com/L Niche. Big up the Patreon whānau, and we always appreciate any new support via Patreon. As I said, it is the best way to support the Niche Case directly. And every Monday and Friday, we dispatch our email newsletter touching on the many wrinkles of Aotearoa sport, as well as all the website content to our website, theniche-case.com, and all the links to the podcast and any other Niche Case information that you require. Sign up via Substack, thenichecase.substack.com, whack in your email address, and then every Monday and Friday evening, probably the best roundup of Aotearoa sport in existence at the moment, aside from the podcast at The Niche Case and aside from theniche-case.com. Wildcard, we always start our podcast with a dose of mindfulness. What says you?
Well, I'm glad that the Niche Cash owns the top three spots, gold, silver, and bronze on that best Kiwi sporting roundups. I've got a poem here to read, a short poem by Mr. William Stafford. Hat tip to the Live and Myth podcast with Michael Mead, who quoted this one. The bit at the end was the bit I was going to use, and then I thought, well, it's actually a short poem, so I'll just read the whole damn thing. And the emphasis on the last couple lines, which is the main mindfulness I was going to use. Mr. William Stafford, poems called For My Young Friends Who Are Afraid. And it goes, there is a country to cross you will find in the corner of your eye, in the quick slip of your foot, air far down, a snap that might have caught. And maybe for you, for me, a high passing voice that finds its way by being afraid. That country is there for us, carried as it is crossed. What you fear will not go away. It will take you into yourself and bless you and keep you. That's the world, and we all live there. Ding, ding, ding.
It's always tricky with your poems because there's so much going on.
Yeah, that's why I emphasize, like, just remember the last couple lines, where because everything else feels like the first 75% of that feels like a setup in order for him to say, what you fear will not go away. It will take you into yourself and bless you and keep you. That's the world, and we all live there. which seems like the main mindfulness.
Yeah, it's day to day. If whatever your well, this is a good way of tying it together because any anger, frustration, anxiety, any of those negative emotions, often they do stem from fear. And so to solve those riddles, you got to get into your fear to then open yourself up to the world.
And this idea that like your fear is a blessing in its own way, it feels like there needs to be another quote to tie that in, but I don't have it, so maybe that's a next week thing. But yeah, your fear will bless you and keep you, and I guess it's also at the end that thing is saying that's the world and we all live here. It's telling like everyone goes through this. You're not alone. Like the fear that you have is not. It doesn't separate you. It's actually what brings you together into the community because we all share these things. So it becomes, I guess that's maybe that's the blessing, is that you find that there is a community around that fear rather than the initial feeling when you're going through those kinds of emotions, which is that you're isolated and separated and apart from everyone else. It's actually the exact opposite.
To set up a couple of these Kiwi sporting topics we've got today, I have been thinking about the Blackcaps and their T20 international standing. And this is a very Kiwi thought process I'm going through, basically revolving around New Zealand insecurities. Because it does feel like, and I've done a bit of research around the Blackcaps and their T20 cricket. And so I've got this very different ideas in my head where no one is talking about the Blackcaps as a T20 World Cup factor, and yet my research suggests that they might be the best team at this World Cup. And this goes like through, we've seen this in Steven Adams, where quite often me and you are bemoaning, like we might get frustrated that no one else is paying attention to what Steven Adams is doing. And I also feel this in like the rugby league coverage where the Kiwi-NRL takeover exists. It's a real thing. But there's not like all you hear about New Zealand Rugby League is how, like, even Vossi was saying this in the commentary last week when New Zealand defeated Jamaica. And he's saying Dylan Watene-Zelezniak's the only player from the Warriors, and that's a real sad state.
That's what you're going to say.
Yeah, that's a very sad state of like New Zealand Rugby League. It's like, no, that's not how
it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. But then, of course, no one is celebrating the ample juniors from Aotearoa that are taking over the NRL. And I think this goes through Lydia Ko as well. Like, people aren't consistently talking about how dominant she is. And it does, like, I think this is a very New Zealand thing where our sporting excellence simmers beneath the radar. It's kind of there when you see it. But for us, we are tracking it so closely that we always see it. We're always aware of it. And I want to flip it from frustration to awareness of this is Aotearoa sport. This is quintessential Aotearoa sport where, and I didn't want to use this word underdog because behind me I've got a couple of dragons. For those who watch House of the Dragon, Vhagar is the very big dragon, and Arax is the small dragon. Shout out to Luke, R.I.P. Vhagar wasn't the underdog. Vhagar was the massive dragon behind me, overshadowing the smaller dragon. So I was comparing the Blackcaps to Vhagar. So the Blackcaps aren't the underdog because Vhagar is like 50 times bigger than Arax, so he's not the underdog, right? But he is the looming beast. He's there, but you don't see him. He's there, but you feel him. And I think that's the thing about Aotearoa sport where I'm thinking about the how these two ideas work together, the frustration of like a lack of spotlight on Aotearoa sport, or just viewing Aotearoa sporting folk as favorites or the big donnies that they actually are. that has now become awareness that this is just Aotearoa sport. And this is what makes Aotearoa sport so fantastic, because you're often not discussed. You're not put in the mix as being among the best, but then you're there. And then people are like, oh, what the fuck? It's like, no, this is Aotearoa sport to the fullest. And I swing back around to the Blackcaps because this is the best example, I believe. And I wrote about this morning. So a lot of this information is live on our website, theniche-case.com. The Blackcaps, T20 cricket this year, they're 13-3. We've discussed Devon Conway's got the best batting average in the world. Finn Allen's got one of the best strike rates in the world. Southey's the leading wicket taker in T20 international cricket. Ish Sodhi, Mitchell Santner, Trent Boult, they are world-class T20 bowlers. Glenn Phillips, most exciting cricketer in the world. We've discussed the nuance of Kane Williamson's cricket as well. And Jet Wildcard, after the Blackcaps defeated Australia, a lot of the coverage was about Australia and their flaws. And then that game gets overshadowed by Pakistan versus India. And now that's been overshadowed by Ireland defeating England. And all that stuff, like, this isn't a complaint. Again, this isn't frustration. This is awareness of how the Blackcaps creep under the radar at these type of tournaments where, and I do counter like my argument in the yarn, because a lot of the Blackcaps T20 cricket this year has been against Scotland, Netherlands, West Indies, who obviously aren't that good because they're not in the big Donny stage of the T20 World Cup, right? So there is a bit of context, but it's also, when you think that the Blackcaps made all three finals of the last cycle, they are pretty good in major tournaments. Now they're in a T20 World Cup where, what was it? As of Thursday morning, the Blackcaps had a win-loss ratio of 4.333 in T20 international cricket this year. Next best is India at 3. And all the players individually, everyone except for Trent Boult is in some kind of career best year for T20 cricket. So all of this comes together and it feels like the Blackcaps are nicely poised. You threw them up, I think it was last week, with that underdog tag. I can't say they are the underdog when I'm comparing them to the biggest dragon ever in the Game of Thrones world or whatever, but I just like the idea that this is a Blackcaps team that no one's really discussing as one of the best T20 international outfits in the world, all playing very good cricket at a major tournament where a lot of other weird shit is happening. And I can feel, and I'm enjoying the Blackcaps being in this darkness is probably the best summary sentence.
Yeah, it might be less underdogs and more dark horses, come to think of it from that perspective. But I guess that was the point of the underdog thing, is that after making all these finals and winning a Test championship, and they were in the World Cup T20 final less than a year ago, or just over a year ago now it would have been. Just watched highlights of their semi-final yesterday while waiting to get confirmation that that game was going to be called off against Afghanistan with the rain, and reminded me of, because I'd forgotten bits and pieces of that. It was fun to watch, like, how good that Daryl Mitchell innings was. And also I've forgotten about that Johnny Bairstow catch on the boundary where his knees struck the ropes, and before he could throw it back in, it was a 6. That thing of Jimmy Neesham, who also did very Jimmy Neesham things. Like, he doesn't only do this against like those European teams that you're talking about, Scotland, Netherlands and stuff, where we saw a lot of that from him earlier this year, just like coming in last 4 overs, 20 off 10 or whatever, just like that 200 strike rate. He did the same thing against England in the World Cup semi-final not so long ago. So, and arguably they might have improved since then, because Devon Conway seems to be batting even better now than he was then, and he had a brilliant innings. I think he got 50 in that. Well, he might have been just short of 50 in that England game, because that was the game where he got out and then he punched his bat and broke his hand and missed the final. So he wasn't in the final. Lockie Ferguson wasn't in the final. He's back now. I'd argue Southey's bowling better now than he was then. And you've got Finn Allen in for Martin Guptill, which whether that, well, there's a couple of things there, isn't it? Because Daryl Mitchell was opening, and now Daryl Mitchell's probably going to be batting 5, and you got Allen in for Guptill, which might not be it's a different strategy as much as it is like versus one player versus the other who's better kind of thing. But that strategy worked pretty bloody well against Australia. So I mean, I think the underdog thing is less about talent and more about perception, isn't it? It's not how good this team is, it's how good other people outside the team think they are. And that if there's a gap between how good you really are and how good other people think you are, that's always really interesting. That's sort of where we come in. Actually, it's one of our jobs is to point out that space and either close the gap or explore it in some way. A lot of stuff I've written about Steven Adams has been like that. But I don't know. I think you're right. I think they've made a big statement in beating Australia, but even then, I still think people sort of think Australia will come right. That worked out so well for the Blackcaps, I reckon. It's just one of those things where, like, for whatever reason, people maybe had them dropping off more than they were when actually they were kind of preparing to hit their peak at the tournament sort of thing. So, and yeah, maybe underdogs is not the right word. Maybe dark horses is more dark dragons, I guess. Dragons in the rain.
We didn't get an actual finalized team list for the game yesterday against Afghanistan, but there was like buzz about Daryl Mitchell coming back into the playing 11. And Daryl Mitchell in T20 international cricket this year averages 33 with a strike rate of 153.
Which is fantastic. That's really good.
It's not fantastic compared to Glenn Phillips's average of 46 and strike rate of 152, or Devon Conway's average of 72 and strike rate of 132. But it is part of this case of adding a very good cricketer into the team. Chapman's been pretty good in T20 international cricket this year. He's got a strike rate of 173, and I did mention Mark Chapman in the Patreon podcast. I do think he is settling into a middle order role for the Blackcaps just with his array of strokes. I think Daryl Mitchell is better and a better option, but Mark Chapman is a perfectly suitable backup middle order batter. It did feel like everyone was building up to the return of Daryl Mitchell. I'm not sure if that's just a New Zealand media thing where they just make shit up, but he is I have him as a first 11 T20 international cricketer, and his record suggests that he was very good at the T20 World Cup last year as well. Also got a fairly substantial career in Australia as a youngster, which also helps. And if you got Daryl Mitchell, Jimmy Neesham, if you got a middle order of Glenn Phillips, Daryl Mitchell, Jimmy Neesham, that's pretty good.
All big game players too. Like not just good players, not just there because they're excellent batters and also fielders in most of those cases, but also big game players who seem to do their best when it matters the most as well. As Mitchell especially showed at that last T20 World Cup, but has done it other like the England tour and with his test batting and stuff, you know, like Mitchell as much as anyone, I think, is someone who fits that bill. It's like when the challenge is at its like toughest, he's probably going to be at his best. And in a tournament, like tournament style cricket, that's just there is nothing better than having someone like that in your middle order, I don't think.
The other thing that I am pondering is big weather guys over here, Wildcard. And we have celebrated the amounts of spin depending on the latitude, which one?
I don't know. I only ever hear them talked about in terms of each other, so it's hard to know which one's the x-axis and which is the y-axis.
This isn't rocket science, but
distance from the what's the word?
Equator.
The equator. Distance from the equator we'll go with.
This isn't rocket science, but in the peak of summer, the closer you are to the equator, the more spin friendly the conditions are going to be. And in Aotearoa, that just means north.
Yeah.
So then late in the summer, you can expect a lot of turn for Hamilton, Tauranga, Auckland, and Whangarei. In Australia wildcard, we are playing a T20 World Cup in October, where, as we're seeing, conditions are kind of Aotearoa-ish. Bit of rain, bit of overcast. It's not warm and sunny. This is a very different situation to playing a first test in Australia in Brisbane. Every day is 30 degrees. This is not that. This is T20 World Cup in October, where the highs are going to maybe max out at 25. There's going to be a chance of rain. It's going to be overcast. And what does that mean? Swing bowling. Who are the best swing bowlers in the world? Tim Southee, Trent Boult. And that helps Aotearoa a lot, I believe. As opposed to Tim Southee coming in hot, dry Aussie conditions, he does have a bag of tricks he can work with. But at the top of the order in a T20 game, if you're trying to bang sixes off Tim Southee and Trent Boult swinging the ball, that's tricky. Combine that with Australian conditions. These are Australian pitches, so you do get a little bit more bounce. That favours Mitchell Santner and Ish Sodhi as tall spinners as well, bigger grounds. So some of those catches, some of those sixes in Aotearoa become catches in Australia. Like, some of these conditions also feel like they're playing into Aotearoa's hands as well, let alone just the key ideas of Kiwi cricket, running hard, great fielding, and those intangibles.
And Southee and Boult, you can absolutely trust. If they think the ball is going to swing, if they think there's even a hint of that the ball might swing, they're going to try and swing it. Like, other bowlers won't necessarily do that at a 2020 World Cup. Even if they can, they'll think, well, I don't want to risk the wide ball or the pitch. Don't want to pitch it up too far early on because I'm just going to get driven down the ground or whatever. These guys will go for that because that's what they do best. And yeah, I thought, because there was a lot of talk about that tri-series, during that tri-series, and some of the piss poor fielding that Blackcaps had, like some drop catches and stuff. And you pointed out a couple of times, like, this is a pre-World Cup tournament. They're kind of taking the piss. It doesn't mean they're out there just clowning around trying to drop catches on purpose. It just means maybe their eye isn't entirely on the ball. Like, you're 99% focused rather than 100% focused. They're clearly 100% focused now, because some of the catching was good as, like, all the fielding was really good against Australia, but also even before that, like, the running between the wickets was fantastic. That was sneaking singles. Just everything looked really sharp, and hopefully that continues, because 2020 is ruthless and things change very quickly from game to game. But even with that rained off game against Afghanistan, I still think that kind of sets the Blackcaps up nicely because of Ireland beating England. It's probably better for Australia than anyone, because Australia just had a good win against Sri Lanka, and they've seen their two closest rivals for the two semi-final spots in this group both drop points on the same day. But the Blackcaps dropped fewer points than England, and we already have a very good net run rate. And I mean, still probably primed. I mean, they could lose to England and still finish ahead of England even if England win all their games from here now, because of the way things have worked out. So it's a good place to be in. As far as things go, it's a shame that game was rained off, because it was a winnable game, but all of these games should be winnable for the Blackcaps, especially after you've just beaten Australia. If you can beat Australia in Australia, you can beat anyone there. So they're in a good position, and I think they should really be targeting, first spot in that. Well, so I'd say first spot in that group. So you play the second qualifier in the semi-final from the other group. But then also, I think maybe our record against India at ICC tournaments, we should just try to finish the opposite side of wherever India goes. Play them in the semi-final and then do what we normally do to them in these things and see how it goes in the final. Don't know who that would mean facing, so yeah, whatever. But it's a good start. Things have worked out quite nicely for the Blackcaps so far, and I think we're seeing them playing some high quality cricket, at least from that Australian game perspective.
I think the ultimate test of what we are discussing with regards to Blackcaps, the T20 international team, we have to differentiate each of these Blackcaps teams because they are kind of separate entities with separate vibes. They need to get the job done against the weaker teams, and there's no reason to think they won't get the job done against the weaker teams. Unlike England, who do have like a history of being like more recent history of being upset by the weaker teams, let
Especially
alone
Ireland.
let alone any of the other big donnies who conveniently miss out in major tournaments, unlike the Blackcaps. But you just want workman-like performances in those games. And I think that's what we would have seen against Afghanistan. I think most teams are going to have a rain-impacted game, and the Duckworth, Lewis, and who was it?
Stern,
the homies Duckworth, Lewis, and Stern, they do make these games more competitive. So if you think Test cricket, ODI cricket, T20 cricket, T20 cricket is the best leveler of those formats in allowing weaker teams to be competitive. And then if you've got a T20 game that is affected by Duckworth, Lewis, and Stern piping up and changing the whole game, again, that works in favor of making it more competitive for the minnow teams. And you would have liked to see the Blackcaps get a fully fledged win over Afghanistan. But given what we saw with Ireland and England, not mad that it was just rained out. Like, that's okay at this stage, given the Blackcaps had a win, good net run rate, all that other stuff. So then you just want to see them get the job done against Sri Lanka. You want to see professional wins of that degree, because that is part of the Blackcaps looming in the shadows idea. There's no point looming in the shadows if you're not doing the basic shit. Like, you got to do the basic shit as part of that looming in the shadows setup. I can't think of an analogy as part of the looming in the shadows whole thing, but you got to do the basics to build up that equity, build up that mana, to then really pounce as a team looming in the shadows. You can't be looming in the shadows if you're losing to the weaker teams, because then you're just shit.
Yeah, you're not looming, you're hiding at that point. And once you get out of the shadows, you got to fight a dragon. So you better be ready to do that. Interestingly, old Wikipedia here, for the 2015 World Cup, the ICC implemented the Duckworth-Lewis-Stern formula, which included work by the new custodian of the method. This is a funny way of putting it, but Professor Stephen Stern from the Department of Statistics at Queensland University of Technology. These changes recognize that teams need to start out with a higher scoring rate when chasing high targets rather than keep wickets in hand. So I assumed Mr. Stern was just there to make 2020 cricket a bit more reflective, but apparently it's a little bit older than that, and it's more about the wickets in hand balance. So there's the enlightenment on that idea. I trust the Blackcaps to take care of business against this. I think that's something they've always been quite good at, and it's kind of why they've been making the finals that they have at previous tournaments, is because they're good at that. It's because they're able to win the games they should win, and then hopefully win just enough of the ones against the sort of evenly matched or better teams. That's been like, it's just straight up been a measurement of their success at all of the recent ICC tournaments up until the current Test Championship. Is probably the one time that's really been let slip. But the last 3 ODI World Cups, that's been the maybe even the last 4 ODI World Cups, really, because they made a semi-final, the one before that in 2011. They might have made the semis in 2007 as well. I can't remember, because there was some stat about Ross Taylor played like 4 in a row. Like, he's the only player who went to ODI World Cup semi-finals in those 4 straight tournaments. But the same thing at the last 2020s. Same thing in the first Test Championship. Is like, what the Blackcaps do is they generally win games they're supposed to win. So the fact that they've started off with a big win against Australia is a massive boost. And I think as long as they do what they've always done and win against who we got, Sri Lanka, Ireland, I think the 2, because Afghanistan's been rained off. I think that's it. And then obviously there's the England game, which will probably determine whether they finish first or second, or maybe third if things don't quite go right in the group. they're good at winning those other games. So they're good at beating teams like Sri Lanka and Ireland. They proved that against Ireland, who gave them the toughest test in Ireland on that European thing. That was the closest they came to dropping games on those European tour, against the ones against Ireland, and they didn't. They found a way. So that's a strength of this Blackcaps team, and I'm relatively confident they can do that.
I've noted that the Blackcaps in T20 cricket, like, they're obviously very good at running between the wickets. So if you hit a 4 early in the over, or if you hit a 4 any time and you get 5 more singles, that's 9 runs off and over. If you hit 2 4s and you get 3 singles, allowing a dot ball, it's 11 runs and over. That feels like the equivalent of the Blackcaps as a whole in a tournament. You just need to win the games you're supposed to win, then get the odd victory against the better nations. You might be in the semi-final. Then you just need to win 1 game. Like, when you break it down, it is kind of less daunting and a lot more easier. And I think that's how the Blackcaps operate a lot of the time. You don't need to win every game to win a World Cup. You don't need to bang boundaries to score 10 runs off and over. There are other ways of doing that, and I think that is a tool that the Blackcaps use.
Well, the first game against Australia is basically hitting the first ball of the over for 6. So that's a good start. That's all you got to do from there is work some singles, and then you've got, well, they've effectively had a dot ball against Afghanistan. So that's 6 runs off 2 deliveries, 4 more singles against Sri Lanka, Ireland, England, and there you go. There's 10 runs off that over, on target for 200, which was winning total against Australia. So that's what it takes.
Transition. Stephen Adams wildcard in the NBA. Memphis Grizzlies are 3-1, and as we've discussed, we are big Stephen Adams fans, and we're always going to highlight Stephen Adams' excellence in a very good team. The thing I want to ask you, wildcard, just to update the Stephen Adams korero. They had a loss to your Dallas Mavericks, then they had a win against the Brooklyn Nets. Now, New York Knicks, Houston, and Brooklyn are the 3 teams Memphis have defeated. They're not going to be the best teams in the NBA this season. Dallas, with Luka Doncic, they might be a playoff contender. But more so the last 2 games, because Memphis lost to Dallas, and not only is that a bad matchup for Stephen Adams, by the looks of it, it seems like a tricky matchup for Memphis, whereas the Brooklyn game, they don't really have big men. And Stephen Adams is a big man, so he played a lot of minutes, and he had the old positive plus-minus. So he was plus 10 in the win over Brooklyn. He was minus 41 in the loss to Dallas. I can see, based on his game logs, there is a matchup niggle there, based on what I know about Brooklyn and what I know about Dallas. Do you have any further insights on why Stephen Adams against Dallas was tricky and why Stephen Adams against Brooklyn was good? Just like, obviously Memphis won against Brooklyn, lost against Dallas, so we know the team situation, but specifically with Stephen Adams, how do you see those matchups? Because I think they show 2 ends of the spectrum for Stephen Adams.
Yeah, potentially. The Dallas game, I think, from memory, just Doncic blew them out very early. And so I think probably all of their starters have probably got low plus minuses, and they never really threatened to bring it back a little bit. They never quite. But I didn't feel like it was necessarily a terrible matchup for him. I could see him having good stats in other games against Dallas, but the blowout meant he didn't play the 4th quarter. There was just no point because they'd lost the game. So that obviously affects his stats and his minutes. I don't know, because Dallas doesn't have crazy big men, but they have made an emphasis of that in the offseason. They signed JaVale McGee and they traded for Christian Wood, who are 2 guys who Adams has played a lot against in the past. So I don't think it's necessarily the head-to-head there. It's maybe just the way, Dallas was hitting 3-pointers, and that's always trouble for teams to defend because it just opens everything up, particularly for big man. I think it was just the state of that game was the difficult thing, maybe more so than a matchup thing. But obviously, there are teams like Dallas who can do that to the Memphis Grizzlies, and that is always going to make it tricky for Steven Adams. The Brooklyn game was 100% what you said. Like they had Brooklyn had Nick Claxton, and I can't remember who the other dude was who was getting some center minutes. And then on top of that, they had like a power forward who had to do something, because the problem with those guys was they kept fouling. And in particular, they kept fouling Steven Adams. And they kept fouling Steven Adams mostly in the third quarter. And it happened especially because they couldn't hang with him. Like he was just pushing dudes around and being physical and being like the immovable object and getting rebounds and playing fantastic. The third quarter against Brooklyn is, I was watching it thinking like, maybe I should just like Steven Adams third quarter versus Brooklyn highlights, like clip some stuff and chuck it all up together. But I ran out of time. But still, he was unreal. That's the best quarter of basketball he's played this year. And it was just dominating guys who were, opposing big men who weren't quite as big or as strong or as roughly about as tall, but not as like dominate, not as what's the word? I don't know. They just couldn't hang with him basically, and he feasted upon that. He bullied them. It was awesome to watch. It was so much fun, and when he gets a matchup like that, it's clear that probably more so than last year. I think the Memphis Grizzlies, they've re-signed him, they've re-upped, everyone's played together for a year. It's very much the same team as it was last year. They're not gonna take that for granted. They're gonna see that, Steven Adams is really bossing this one. That doesn't mean he's gonna be getting like 5-10 shots a quarter or anything like that. It's just never going to happen. But it does mean, if he's roughing these dudes up, let's really go for it with the screens. Let's really go for it with the attacking the offensive boards and stuff. Not just him, but others. Because if he's got two guys trying to like stop him from getting the offensive rebound, it's pretty easy for someone else to just walk in and take it themselves, because he's taken two guys out of the contest. Things like that. I thought you really saw Memphis against Brooklyn in that third quarter in particular target that matchup, and that's pretty awesome to see. If that's the case moving forward, we've seen them really make an emphasis of the screen game with Ja Morant. That's also pretty cool. So screen assists are going to be very high. Already, I think he already had I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been total screen assists. He led the league last year, but I think Rudy Gobert might have popped him for the per game averages. So Rudy Gobert's on a different team now, probably not going to have the same style of play. Adams is on the same team, and they've re-upped even further. I think he might take that title back. And there will be games like the Dallas one where you don't see that kind of thing. But as long as there are also he's effectively a high caliber role player for this team. He's not going to make an all-star squad or anything like that. You need Ja Morant, maybe Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. when he comes back. You need those guys to be like among your 3 to 5 best players pretty much every night if you're going to win games. You don't need Steven Adams to be one of your 3 best players every night. It's just when it works, you lean into that. That's what we saw against Brooklyn. When it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So there's nothing, you just don't need to force it. You rely on other dudes, and that's not what we saw against Dallas because they got smoked, but that's probably what we will see in certain other games. But as long as there are those Brooklyn matchups where Adams can just do whatever he wants, and the Memphis Grizzlies let him do whatever he wants and make the most of that around him, that's what we want to see,
Is there a similarity between the challenge offered by Dallas and what we saw against the Golden State Warriors last season in the playoffs, was it? Where it was just like, that's a bad matchup? Just with the 3-point shooting, having a big man who can... and it was the Timberwolves were quite tricky.
Minnesota Timberwolves, yeah. He came back against the Golden State Warriors and was actually awesome. Like, people thought it was that... People assumed that would be a bad matchup, and it just wasn't. He was fantastic. He was their best player over the last 3 games of a series they admittedly lost, and after Ja Morant was injured.
Yeah, it just seems like the matchups where if you've got a big man who can shoot threes and or a player like Luka Doncic or someone like that who can get a switch onto Steven Adams and then cook him up outside the 3-point line. Those seem tricky, but we'll be interested to see how the Memphis Grizzlies develop that defensive system over the course of the season to counter those matchups that I think they know they're going to face deep in the playoffs. Speaking of deep in the playoffs, wildcard.
The return of Jaren Jackson will help that as well, just
Correct.
to add that. He hadn't been playing. He will be playing soon.
The New Zealand Breakers are deep in the playoffs. The early season playoffs. They are second.
As it stands.
In the NBL. 6 games, 4 wins, 2 losses. This weekend, they are playing Adelaide. Let's just double check where that game is. Adelaide are 4th. They've had 2 wins and 1 loss. And we are just learning about the Breakers. We're just trying to learn how they're playing their basketball, what kind of team they are this season. Obviously, everything's a fair bit different this season. So we're just tracking the Breakers. We're just learning with the Breakers. That game is Friday evening. Since the variety show Wildcard, have you pondered anything with the Breakers? Have you checked in with anything? Or are we just moving things along? They play Adelaide. We'll check in again next week.
Yeah, mostly that. I don't know. Adelaide will be a frisky one because they haven't played much, because they were the ones that went over, and I think it was them who went over to America and beat the Phoenix Suns in an NBA preseason game. So coached by CJ Bruton, I'm pretty sure as well still. So nice areas there. I don't think they've got a key, or is that where Hiram Harris is playing? I can't remember. Let me check their roster just quickly. Hiram Harris is at Adelaide 36ers. So there you go. They do have a Kiwi on their roster.
Well, this is a monster game.
And I think they
then.
might be good. It is a monster game, yeah.
For a couple
of reasons. It's always nice and intense when Hiram Harris is playing. Probably a guy who could have been signed by the Breakers at a couple opportunities as well, which is one of those things that they have let slip in the past in particular, but making some amends this season, as they're doing in a lot of different areas, it seems, because Isaiah Leafa was that kind of signing as well, like someone they didn't sign initially, went to Southeast Melbourne as a development player, then did so well as a development player, they signed him as like a fully contracted dude, and then opted into his player extension, I think, and then like a couple months later got a release and moved back to sign for the Breakers, which is a little bit weird, like how that went down. It was a little bit strange. I guess it was a handshakey type of thing. But it has worked out for the Breakers because he's been a good addition. They've brought Rob Lowe back into the fold. He's been a good addition. And then I think as much as anything, this team since the current ownership took over, have never re-signed an import. Like there's no import who's done multiple seasons for them. There are at least 2 to 3, probably at least 3 imports who, the most recent of which being Peyton Siva, who's done the same thing, who have come back to the NBL after playing for the Breakers, but signed for Australian teams. I think Sean Long did that. DJ Newbill did that. So I don't see that as a very good sign. I think that's a good reflection of the league. I don't think that's a great reflection of the Breakers, but they've signed 3 pretty handy imports this year, 3.5 arguably, because they've got an extra import hanging around as like an injury replacement type, which is something they did last year as well, is just sort of being a little bit frisky with the roster regulations, do what you got to do. But their imports are playing quite well, and they're playing quite well early, which isn't always the case as well. I mean, Brantley was terrible in the first game, but he's not the first not the first overseas player to rock up to the NBL and have trouble with his fouling and whatnot, getting used to the league in his debut. He won't be the last.
I'm going to ban that. We're not talking about Brantley's first game ever again. This is just
an anomaly. This is it. Yeah. This is us burying it. It's done. He's actually quite a good player, but that's the point. Their imports have been really good so far, and that's a sign of much better recruitment, because you need your imports have to be your best players in this league, because everyone else's imports are their best players. It's very hard you can find an NBA caliber Australian or New Zealander to lead the way kind of thing. you might get some sort of on the fringes that you can add to your imports kind of thing, but your imports are going to determine like where your ceiling is pretty much in this league. And the Breakers seem to have signed some decent ones, and that makes a big difference. Like, you decent imports, suddenly they're a lot more competitive. Maybe they can make the semifinals. I don't know, but yeah. And mentioned to your origin, like in relation to your original question, I still have this big bubble of skepticism based on the last couple of years, and I do want to see this play out for longer before I start making judgments, rather than just at the moment Shoshin mindset, absorb it all. Just whatever information is out there, absorb it, rather than trying to contextualize it or anything. Just take it in. Okay, that's interesting. Note that down, and then we'll see what's still there. Like, what those notes look like in, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks time or something like that. Maybe only a couple of weeks time. They keep winning games, then suddenly that process gets a bit quicker. But we'll see what that looks like in due course. Maybe is a better way to say it.
I often look into a crystal ball, and I can see myself opting for a similar mahi method roughly early March next year, when the New Zealand Warriors start the NRL season. And actually, I'm in that zone right now with the Rugby League World Cup wildcard, because, as we've said many times, it's a fool's gold to be comparing wins for the contenders against the minnows in the Rugby League World Cup. And we are definitely in that stage where we're rolling through these games. I think the Kiwis are playing someone. Wales? Ireland? Someone? Ireland, that's the one.
Ireland, yeah.
That's my point here, wildcard. Big ups the Rugby League World Cup. And like, I don't never sleep on the importance of this event, but as far as competing with the other Aotearoa sporting wrinkles right now, this stage of the World Cup does fall beneath some other sporting things. And even in the Rugby League round wildcard, something else is more important right now. And that's some Kiwi-NRL junior notes wildcard, because we've had a couple of funky learnings. The Shoshin mindset is on display here. Don't claim to be the know-it-all Kiwi-NRL junior guy. I just like learning about this shit. I like seeing where the names pop up. I like seeing how clubs are signing Kiwi-NRL juniors. And I just want to throw it out there. Shout out to the Kiwi-NRL takeover. I think we had Dean Mariner. He was a big Donny of the past few years. Left Aotearoa, goes to Palm Beach, Currumbin, part of the Broncos setup. Australian schoolboys, dominates everything in Queensland straight after moving from Aotearoa. The two best schoolboy players, they were tied. I think it's the Justin Hodges Award for the best players in the Alan Langer Cup. Basically, schoolboy MVP. Like, who gives a shit about these other guys? The schoolboy MVPs in Queensland this year were Keano Kini, Northcote Jr., and Karl Oloapu, Randwick Jr. from Wellington. Keano Kini is in the Gold Coast Titans system. He is likely to spend a bit of time around the NRL squad, I think, this summer. Also, shout out to Vhagar Sikahali, who is a Manirewa junior. He is training with the Titans NRL squad this year. And I think there's another guy, Emmanuel Kalekale, who is a Glenora junior. They have both been promoted to train with the Titans NRL squad. Keano Kini is he's a flash. He is literally a flash. He's just a flash. A fullback flash. Can play in the halves. He's quick. He's an exceptional talent, obviously dominating Queensland footy. I think he played in the same Palm Beach Currumbin team as Dean Mariner last year, and was the big Donny this year. Karl Oloapu, I didn't know much about. I think he's at Marsden State High School, but he is from Wellington. Randwick Jr. We're seeing a lot of Randwick Juniors climbing up the Kiwi-NRL ranks right now as part of the Kiwi-NRL expansion. I think he's in the Broncos system. And this continues some strong Broncos recruitment. I don't know if Oloapu was recruited by the Broncos, then placed into a school. A lot of these players, they are moving to Australia with their families to set up over there because it's obviously a better opportunity to just go to school there, be entrenched in better footy systems. But the two best schoolboy players in Australia, in Queensland, Kiwi-NRL juniors, after Dean Mariner the year before. That is...
So all three of them are linked with the Broncos system as well, you're saying?
Keano, Kini's and the Titans.
Titans, right.
Yeah.
Who also have strong Kiwi-NRL links, don't they? So
slightly... They're taking a slight dip wildcard because two more bits of news. Isaac Matalavea-Booth, another Manurewa Jr., peep the trend there. He was recruited by the Titans, and I think the Titans NRL team brought him into trainings prior to facing Melbourne because Matalavea-Booth is similar size to Nelson Asofa-Solomona. But now
there aren't too many of those to go around, so
yeah,
you're filling out your scout teams, you know.
But now Matalavea-Booth has been signed by the Bulldogs.
Ooh.
So this does do some Warriors healing because folks are always worried about juniors leaving the Warriors to go to other NRL clubs. Like, this happens quite a lot in the Australian clubs as well. They recruit the player from Aotearoa to then play for another NRL club. All right, so we need to ease up on that Warriors hatred of not signing juniors from Aotearoa or the best juniors, because Australian clubs do all the hard work to recruit a player from Aotearoa for another NRL club to sign them to play NRL, right? It's equally as niggly as whatever you're thinking about the Warriors. And of course, another example, Sione Mawala, Manurewa Jr., he was signed by the Raiders. He has also joined the Bulldogs. So I'm just tracking some of those things. I think I'll write about the Keano, Kini, Oloapu award-winning double that they've shared. But there are some greater Kiwi-NRL junior ideas at play here. Busy time because all these squads are being announced. Jersey Flag squads. We'll have a Warriors SG Ball squad as well as all the Queensland and New South Wales squads popping up as well. So some of that news and some of that information has overshadowed the Rugby League World Cup for me at the moment.
Well, the thing about the Rugby League World Cup at this stage is it's like, you know, when you get what's a good way to put it? You only see like just general internet fandoms get really upset at something because it doesn't fit what they expected, like a movie or an album or a song or whatever to be. And then looking at that as a distance, it's just like, well, it's not intended for you. Like, if you don't like it because it's not what you thought it was going to be, maybe it's not for you. I think that's kind of what the group stage is like in the Rugby League World Cup, where it's like, as far as the Kiwis are concerned, this isn't really for them. It's just like basically warm-up games, get through, and then when the knockouts start, that's where things really ramp up. And it might be one and done once you get to the knockouts, but you know, sport's ruthless like that. Really, the group stage is not for the Kiwis versus Lebanon, Kiwis versus Ireland, Kiwis versus Jamaica games. It's for the Lebanon versus Jamaica, Lebanon versus Ireland, Ireland versus Jamaica games is kind of the point of that that aspect of the tournament, I think. And then the major nations, come into the fold after that. But as a Kiwis fan getting upset about the group stage because it's not that competitive, it's like, well, this is what Jamaica needs. It's they're going to get smoked by the Kiwis, but also they're going to get a good game against Lebanon. They're going to get a good game against Ireland. That's good for those countries and the development of the sport. And they get to say, I played against, Nelson Asofa-Solomona or Dylan Brown or Joey Manu or whoever. That's cool. Some like there's a story to tell, but it's the other games, the competitive ones, that matter the most. Just quickly as well on the Bulldogs, is that because you mentioned a couple of those guys, Bulldogs scooping up Kiwi juniors, is that a trend? Because I just wonder, because of the Phil Gould connection, obviously he spent some time at the Warriors and before that at the Panthers, where one of the things that he did at the Panthers was really like target sort of Aotearoa outpost, basically. And is that something we're seeing from the Bulldogs as well, or is that just sort of like everyone's signing players, so there's a couple Kiwis are going to end up at every club kind of thing?
Just before that, everything you said about the World Cup was true. My thinking is that these Kiwi-NRL junior nuggets have risen up in a value in my mind. It's not anything negative about the World Cup. It's
Sure,
more
it's
more how funky, like, two schoolboys from Aotearoa are the best players in Queensland. Like, that just seems of greater value than the World Cup. I'm like, it's a weird one, but I'm not trying to diminish this stage of the World Cup. But Bulldogs, this is a tricky one for me personally, because I have thrown up this Warriors versus Bulldogs rivalry, because old mate Phil Gould was happy to help out the Warriors for a hot second. As soon as a better offer came along, he joins the Bulldogs. And of course, we've got this Panthers connection between the Warriors and Bulldogs, because Panthers had multiple assistant coaches, but apparently only one of them was good. And that is the coach of the Bulldogs, Cameron Ciraldo. Guess who has the other Panthers assistant coach? The Warriors. So there is this, guess who is the hottest team in the NRL according to all the NRL media? The Bulldogs. Guess who is never a hot team in the NRL? The Warriors. Like, there is a brewing rivalry that I would like to embrace here. At the same time, correct, old mate Phil Gould does love Aotearoa. Said it many times, he was instrumental in getting James Fisher-Harris to the Panthers as part of the Northland connection. Phil Gould himself went to Whangarei to scout out some talent in Northland. That is, like, other NRL teams might send a scout. Phil Gould himself was there. And I think you're seeing similar stuff with the Bulldogs. They do have some junior signings. It's a bit trickier at that level, like SG ball level, and then trying to come up to under 21s to find the precise information. That's what we are learning about over the course of the summer as those squads get announced. There was a situation this year where Eric Va'afusuanga was playing for Redcliffe as part of the Warriors connection. He actually scored a fantastic try for the future Warriors in that game at Mount Smart against the Tigers. They just gave him the ball off a scrum and he just ran down the sideline and scored. So he was playing for Redcliffe, then he plays a future Warriors game, then he pops up for a Bulldogs under-21s team. And I was like, well, that's weird. Then again, like, I don't know if that move has been, like, finalized moving forward. He didn't really play much to finish the season. But I do think there is I think Phil Gould is getting busy at the Kiwi-NRL junior recruitment level with the Bulldogs. I think that is going to be something he knows a lot about. And that is a growth area for the Bulldogs, because they were they recruited Morgan Harper from the Waikato. They didn't really have to, he was probably the main junior that has come up through the Bulldogs system in recent years. They also had Remus Smith and some other characters, but of course the Bulldogs, in all their wisdom, let all those players go and signed more expensive players. Like, they literally replaced Remus Smith and Morgan Harper with Nick Cottridge. It didn't work. So I'd like to see the Bulldogs, from a Kiwi-NRL perspective, just get back to the basics. Basics they've done very well, going back to Sonny Bill Williams and those type of recruitment moves. I think Phil Gould is getting busy. And yeah, I think he's a major factor in a greater Kiwi-NRL junior presence at the Bulldogs.
Rule number one of NFL recruitment: you never overpay for a wide receiver, and rule number one of NRL recruitment: never overpay for a winger. The same rule. It's not necessary unless you think that winger is going to be a fullback down the line. But that's
I think the NFL one is don't overpay for a running back, though.
Or don't overpay for a running back either.
Yeah. Definitely never
Well, that's
overpay
different
for it.
reasons. Because you can find good wideout. Well, you probably overpay for your number one wideout in NFL, to be fair. But beyond that, not so much. Well, that's the Patriots model, isn't it? Bill Belichick just recycles his wide receivers as long as he's got a quarterback, which he doesn't have anymore, but that's his problem.
Well, it's the other thing.
Running
The NBA
backs is
example,
different because they just break. They snap in half. They can't run anymore.
the NBA example is like how many you can get as many guards as you want. There is no shortage of players who play the guard position between 6 foot and 6'5". Getting the unique athletes who are 6'7" and like long and have all these multi-tool skill sets, that is more difficult. Like, trust me, as someone who's tracking Kiwi-NRL juniors, there's no shortage of wingers. The Melbourne Storm just roll out a new winger every year. It's Matt Duffy. He finishes, he gets paid more, he's gone. Suliasi Vunivalu, he finishes, he gets paid more, he's gone. Marika Korobete, he gets paid more, he's gone. Every year there's a new Storm winger. Next year, it's going to be Will Warbrick. Like, that's exactly what the Storm do. They don't have to invest big money in wingers. Whereas if you look at what the Warriors did, they signed Ken Mamalo and Dad Fusatura on decent money, when I think the wing position is just a spot where you just rotate new players in and invest your salary cap elsewhere. Going back to our percentages wildcard, if $1 million and a 10 million cap is 10%, you're not paying 8% of your salary cap to a winger, right? You're not paying 7%. You're not paying 6%. You might pay 6%, 600K. But that's all changing because the salary cap's gone up to 11 mil or something like that. Have to confirm that.
Yeah, but and the Storm are basically the Patriots model of, they're the team that does the same thing of like operating in a way where it feels like they're a little bit ahead of the game. And if the Storm are recycling wingers and still being a very good team most years, a little bit of a drop off last year or this year, but I mean, that's a good indication that everyone else should maybe follow that model. Like, if you can find wingers, then you don't need to overpay for the ones you've got. You can find someone who's mostly as good for a lot cheaper and then spend good money on a really good half or a fullback or a front rower, you know?
I do know Wildcat. If I'll just buy myself some time here as I do a quick Google search. Shout out to Matalavea-Booth, because he is the opposite of this situation. He is a unique freakazoid. Like, he is as big as the Sofa Solomona. So what do you want to do? You want to go above and beyond to sign a player like that. There aren't many of them. So you want to make sure you get them. Shout out to Alec MacDonald. Played a couple of games on the wing for the Storm this year. Also played centre. Came out of nowhere. But that's what the Storm do. And he came out of nowhere to the extent where I didn't know he's from New Zealand.
Really? There we go.
Shout out Alec MacDonald. He was from Auckland, and he moved to Queensland when he was 9 years old. So shout out to him. Fantastic. Apparently he's a lot.
9 years old is fine. Got players who have spent less time here playing for the Kiwis. No dramas there.
There might be some other guy, Grant Anderson or something like that. Some Anderson McDonald character was on the wing for the Storm this year, and I had no idea who the fuck he was. Football here, Wildcard.
Yeah, righto.
Would you like to produce some hard and fast National League roundups? Are you going to do men and women separate, or are you going to blend them together? How do you want to do it?
We'll do them separate. Just roll through the upcoming fixtures. Because it's the women's stuff is absolutely fascinating this week. We've just had a double-header weekend where everyone played the same team twice, home and away, sort of taking us to the halfway stage, which means that this round 8, or week 7, but the 8th round of fixtures, because there were 2 last week, is the first time, or how do I phrase this? So each team is playing the last opponent who they haven't yet played. And the first game of this weekend is on a Friday night at Western Springs under the lights on Seddon Field. Western Springs versus Eastern Suburbs, who are the two runaway leaders of this competition, haven't played each other yet. Both undefeated. Western Springs drew with Northern Rovers on the short turnaround last week on Monday, but Eastern Suburbs came from 2-0 down at halftime to beat Auckland United on the quick turnaround, which was a weird game because Auckland United only had 2 players on the bench. Neither of them was a goalkeeper, and then their goalkeeper got injured. So what happened is an outfielder had to go and goal, and the winning goal, she dove over the top of it, which, so it goes, not her fault, shouldn't have been in that position in the first place. But Western Springs versus Eastern Suburbs is an unreal contest. The only thing I'm not sure about is they're the 2 best defenses in the league so far. Does that, and they're also the 2 best attacking teams in the league so far. Does that mean that we're going to get a 0-0 draw, or does that mean we're going to get like a 4-3 win for one of these teams? No idea, but that game's an absolute belter. Probably because they're likely to be the 2 grand final teams. Probably the first of 3 times they'll play each other over the next 2 months as well. Saturday, 1 game, Capital versus Canterbury. Capital started scoring goals finally. Some of that was against Central, but still. Canterbury United, meanwhile, coming off a draw and a loss to Southern United. Bit of an upset there. Canterbury not quite what they have been in the past, but against Capital, maybe a chance for them to get 3 points. They need to if they want to have any hope of a top half of the table finish. Then on Sunday, you got Auckland United versus Central. Auckland United, just mentioned, really short on numbers, but starting to get their under-17s back. So they should have a strong team. Central lost every game, but they've also made good signs of progress. I think their best defensive effort we saw from them against Capital in the last game. So good test for them up in Auckland. And then Southern United versus Northern Rovers, also a cracking game because Southern conceded 13 goals in their first 2 games, both against Auckland teams as well. Since then, really figured things out. They made a swap at goalkeeper. They've brought 1 or 2 players in. I think Kennedy Bryant's really helped them as a striker. And they've got back to the Southern formula of really strong defense and then great counter-attacking play up against Northern Rovers, who have been kind of losing players a little bit. They've had some injuries. Their best player, Michaela Foster, signed with the Phoenix. We might talk about that in a sec. So really interesting game there because this could, if Southern United can turn up against Northern Rovers, they have a shot of finishing 3rd in this competition, which would be incredible after how they started. That's the games for the women. We'll go a little quicker with the old fellas here. Napier City versus Wellington Olympic. Wellington Olympic are as good a team outside of Auckland City. They're just fantastic to watch. Rovers really good defensive setup. Wellington Olympic unstoppable attacking transitions. So that's the big thing to focus on. How much space those Wellington Olympic attackers can get themselves. Phoenix Reserves versus Miramar Rangers will be a funky game in Wellington. Miramar also shorthanded compared to what they were during the normal season. Phoenix Reserves played some really nice football recently, especially in first halves. And putting 90 good minutes together is their problem. They did beat Christchurch United last week, but that was their team down to 10 men. So they can do that against Miramar. That'd be funky. Auckland United versus Auckland City. Just a good old-fashioned Auckland derby. Birkenhead on Sunday versus Kashmir Technical is quite a funky game. Kashmir Tech were really good last week. Gavin Coughlin just had a brilliant game. Birkenhead lost their most recent match to Wellington Olympic, which probably drops them out of top 2 things. So they really need to win this game. Christchurch United versus Melbourne United. Neither of these teams have won a game so far. So there's your thing there, is which one of these can one of them beat the other one? There's your funkiness. 2 strong defensive teams as well. Limited options up front for them. So 0 draw territory might be close, but should be interesting, that one.
Let's try and roll through some of these other football topics one at a time as we finish the podcast. Wellington Phoenix women. They are getting together. They are assembling a squad. You mentioned someone who was dipping out of the National League to go to the Wellington Phoenix women. What's the deal there?
Michaela Foster, yeah. Pretty much the best player in the National League. She is, I'm not sure how old she is, probably about 23. She's been to college in the States and come back, so she's a little bit older than the sort of players they've often been signing. One of 4 scholarship players that Phoenix have added this year. Foster can literally play every position. Probably don't want to put her in goal, but she can play every position. I've seen her play centre back. I've seen her play left back, right back, across the midfield, attacking midfield, defensive midfield, striker on the wing, every position. She can kick with both feet. She scores goal directly from corners. She's a fantastic player, great finisher. She takes penalties with both feet as well. She scored a penalty in the National League earlier. It was like, which the commentators were sort of like, which foot is she going to use, right or left here? She's a great player. And it's really cool to see someone in that position being given the opportunity to prove they can play at a higher level. It's a scholarship deal, so it's relatively low risk as well from the Phoenix. They've been given 4 of those when they normally have 2. Well, last year they had 2. They were Alyssa Wynnum and Charlotte Lancaster. Charlotte Lancaster is back. She's got a second scholarship deal. Wynnum's moved on to a senior deal, so there's a bit of inspiration. Tadere Moana Walker is another one who was with the team on a senior deal last year. Didn't get another senior deal, but has accepted a scholarship deal to return to the Phoenix, which coach rightly highlighted the mentality of a young player there, being like, I'm not going to cop an ego hit there. I just want the opportunity, and I want to come back and feature with a team that's going to give me the best chance of game time. That's cool to see. And then the other one was Georgia Candy, who's I think MVP of the National League a couple of years ago when she played for Capital. She was the backup to Anna Leet at the Under-17 World Cup when they got bronze medals. So she's a very good goalkeeper, really good shot stopper, and quite important because Charlotte Lancaster last year in one game when Lily Oldfeld was away with the Football Ferns and they couldn't sign another goalie, Charlotte Lancaster had to wear the gloves on the bench as the designated reserve keeper. Well, now they got 3 goalies, so that's not a problem. An extra reserve, extra scholarship player being used there. They have 2 spots left to sign, both full contracted players, and one is a New Zealand spot, one is an Australian spot, but we've already seen with the Australian spots, the likes of Brianna Edwards has been signed in one of them, the backup goalie, although I think Georgia Candy will give her a run for her money as the reserve keeper, actually. She's a dual international operating in an Australian spot. Also, Michaela Robertson, the first Wellingtonian signed by the Phoenix. Also, just full-blooded Kiwi, but with an Australian mother, so she got an Australian passport in order to sign for the Phoenix. I don't know if it's directly to sign for the Phoenix, but I think it might have been as an Australian player so that they could sign an extra Kiwi with one of their other spots. So I think maybe you'll see that with their last Aussie spot is maybe another dual national and also one more Kiwi to sign. And we'll see how that goes, because some of those seasons in like America and Scandinavia coming to a close, it might be a good time to be announcing some of those other players, what they're up to next. There might be a few availabilities. We'll see how that goes with the last 2 spots for the Phoenix Wahine. What else we got on the agenda?
Wellington Phoenix are facing the Melbourne City on Sunday wildcard. Melbourne City are first.
Yeah, they're pretty good
in the A-League. What's your vibe here? Is this a plucky Phoenix opportunity to get another draw? Or is this a tough fixture early in the season that you're not expecting much from?
Probably, I don't know, a bit of both. It's City are very good, and I don't think the Phoenix played too well last week. Or they didn't play very well last week. They surprisingly off their game, I thought, particularly in the first half, and still figuring things out in attack as well with some of those combinations. So that wasn't great, but I don't know. The one thing that helps is I think this team is very good at bouncing back under Ufuk Talay. Like, they don't often have 2 terrible games in a row, at least a little bit last year when they had some of those injury problems, but that's not the drama right now. So I do think they'll bounce back. And I mean, just put it simply, if they do get a draw away to Melbourne City, that is a point earned. There's no points dropped there whatsoever. Don't want to see them suffer another very comfortable kind of defeaty type situation where suddenly 2 draws and 2 losses from their first 4 games, and it's looking like another pretty raggedy, confidence low start to the season, slow burn kind of thing. It would be nice if they could get the kind of result, if not the kind of result, at least the kind of performance to spur them on for the next month or so and with better results in the future.
It would be very different starting the season with 2 draws and then emerging 2 draws, 2 losses.
Yeah.
Then we're going from this is a improvement on previous slow starts to this is just another slow start.
Yeah. Pretty much. That's not, I mean, that's the risk, but I don't know. They'll have better fixtures in the week after. They've got MacArthur at home, so that's a bit slightly better. I mean, any home game is hopefully with a couple home draws to start, things look a lot worse when you then have a couple away games and lose them both. It suddenly makes you realize those might have been points dropped rather than points gained. So,
was there anything from the last loss that you're worried about seeping through to this game against Melbourne City, like maybe a weakness that the best team in the A-League can expose?
I would like to see Tim Payne playing centre back. I've thought about this and toyed with this on the podcast a couple of times. I just think they're a better team with Payne and Wooden because they're both two aggressive front foot style players. And Payne's good enough with his feet, as is Wooden. It'd be a little bit better. You don't have the left-footed, better ball playing option of Josh Laws, but I just think you have better defenders in that case. And maybe even someone better going forward at right back if Callan Elliott's playing, who has his limitations defensively, but he's pretty sharp in other ways. So that's the main thing. Is I just think, especially those goals they conceded early against Newcastle, they're great goals, but also it's like maybe if you're just a bit more defending on the front foot, those don't happen, you know, particularly that McGarry goal, like you can close them down a little earlier.
Your Flying Kiwis roundup is live. There's lots of information there, as well as just following the social media on Twitter. You're all over the signings. We did have Ryan Thomas returning to PEC Zwolle, so we can't touch on that in the podcast, but I'm sure you've got information about that all over the place. So tap in for any Flying
Sounds
Kiwis
like an email thing.
There you go. Plug for the email tomorrow, Friday. And that is the Nichecast for this week. Enjoy your couple of days of Aotearoa sport. Amazing times to be alive. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Raise your mana Māori ora. Cha-cha.